When we look at life as a whole, we start to see particular patterns for how life structures and organizes itself. The 16 patterns of life illuminates the main rules for how life operates. So life builds from the bottom up. So every individual is a colony of smaller non-living bits. Further, these smaller bits were the first to develop in our evolutionary history. Bacteria developed chemical systems, so they transformed atmosphere. They get energy from the sun, and they invented sexual reproduction and locomotion. And they worked out how to merge and organize into higher collectives that later formed more complex organisms. Life assembles itself into chains. So the smallest of life's components use chains as the organizing principle. Life's chains have different links. There are two types of chain molecules: information chains, which store and transmit info, and working chains that carry out the business of living. And this is a picture of a DNA molecule. Life needs an inside and an outside. Life's chemicals need to be kept close together so they can meet and react readily. The inner environment needs different conditions than the outside, and these differences need to be protected by some kind of barrier. Some examples of these include the bark of a tree or the atmosphere of the earth surrounding it. Life uses a few themes to generate many variations. So life hangs on to what works. When cells divide, they do so in a limited number of patterns. These patterns exist in the larger organisms the cells make up. Life patterns tend to borrow from mathematical rules, so the golden ratio, similar proportions, Fibonacci spirals, and fractals are all mathematical rules that life follows. Life organizes with information, so life relies on a lot of information to function. It has been estimated that the information a human needs for all of their functions would fill up 1,500 encyclopedias. This doesn't seem like a lot, but that's because the information is streamlined. A complex robot has thousands of intricate parts, but rather than having to assemble all of these individual parts for each robot, there are sub-robots to create the parts. This is seen in how DNA makes proteins, and these proteins make cells, and so on down the ladder of life. Life encounters variety by shuffling information. So cells exchanging information is the earliest form of reproduction. Over time, reproduction allowed for the exchange of larger pieces of information, an elaborate form of information reshuffling. To illustrate how complex this can be, when shuffled together, two decks of 52 cards have 2.5 times 10 to the 29th power. So that's 25 and 28 zeros following, that many possible outcomes. So humans have roughly 3,000 pairs of unmatched genes. So when shuffled, that gives 10 to the 3,000th power possible outcomes. Compare that to the estimated 10 to the 80th number of atoms in the world, and you can see how vast genetic options are. Life creates with mistakes. When genetic material is passed on with a defect, so one little nucleotide in a DNA molecule is off, it creates problems. These problems sometimes end up as benefits. So elephant skin is an example. Their early ancestors were small and thought to be smooth-skinned. Large animals need help cooling, so wrinkled skin allows more cooling because of the surface area. So wrinkles allowed elephants to grow much larger than they originally were. Life occurs in water. Our cells are 70% water. Cells owe their shape and rigidity to H2O molecules. The polarity allows it to form lattices. This is why water is liquid when others of its size are gas. This is also why water expands when it freezes while others contract. And because water freezes, it floats. It floats because of its density, which keeps the water below it warmer because it is insulated and allows the water below to be unfrozen, and so life can thrive within it. Life runs on sugar. And sugar is a simple energy-packed chains of 3 to 7 carbon atoms combined with hydrogen and oxygen. Life's central sugar is a 6-carbon glucose. Plants, algae, and bacteria all burn sugar. This is what we call respiration, and convert it to carbon dioxide, oxygen, and H2O, water. Fossil fuels are pressurized plant and animal remains, so therefore even our fossil fuels, which our cars and trains and planes run on, even those are made up of basic sugars because plants and animals are. Life works in cycles. Life loves loops. We talk about these all the time in Montessori education. Plant respiration, the circulation of the blood, life cycles, water cycle, all of those things. These loops are all self-correcting to help maintain balance so that when one thing gets imbalanced in the loop, other parts of the loop will compensate to correct. Life maintains itself by turnover. So keeping a living organism in a state of high organization necessitates the continuous building and destroying of parts. The molecules and cells of an organism are continually breaking themselves down to form new cells and molecules. It's thought that each day, 7% of your human molecules are turned over. That means in 2 weeks, 100% of them have turned over. You have completely new molecules. Life tends to optimize rather than maximize. So to optimize means to achieve just the right amount. So Goldilocks was an optimizer. Not too hot, not too cold. This is why too much or too little sugar in the blood can kill a diabetic. If you sleep too much, your muscles will atrophy, and if you exercise too much, they will overexert. Molecules follow this rule as well, with complex signaling to ensure that they are optimized. Maximizing can get nature into trouble, though, sometimes. For instance, look at the Irish elk's antlers, these guys. They developed to maximize mating potential by attracting larger antlers, attracting better mates, but they inhibited the elk's ability to move through the forest and avoid predators. Too much of something can be detrimental. The main purpose of optimizing is to allow for the survival of a species or the passing on of DNA. Life is opportunistic. Organisms seek out situations that are favorable for survival. So for instance, the bee orchid designed itself to attract the male bee to initiate pollination. So it has a part of its body or its flower petals that look like a bee's body. The mezcal cactus, where mezcal, the alcohol, comes from actually, it retracts underground completely, so completely disappears from the surface and goes underground when the weather is too dry or windy in order to protect itself. Life competes within a cooperative framework. This works on two seemingly contradictory ideas that are actually not contradictory at all. So the first one is that every creature acts in its own self-interest, and the second one is that the living world works through cooperation. So self-interest, cooperation. They don't seem to go together, but organisms act in self-interest, but not in self-destruction. So when you look at these two hippos, they are fighting for dominance, but they don't want to actually cause harm. Well, they don't want to kill each other because they want their species to be able to continue. So it's more of a show of power than anything else. Another example is that parasites only feed enough on their host so that they don't kill their host. Otherwise, they would not be able to survive either. Life is interconnected and interdependent. This is best exemplified in the coral reef. Coral skeletons provide homes for small fish provide food for big fish, and big fish provide food for sharks, so on and so forth. Also, as you see in this picture, feeder fish clean bacteria and parasites from larger fish, thus saving it from harm. When one part of the complex system of the coral reef fails, it affects the entire system.